Welcome to True Crime and Wine. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn Dale, and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, thank you for joining me every single upload. I love and I appreciate you so much. I dropped the True Crime Wine Wednesday today because it's most likely this probably won't come out on a Wednesday. If it does, great. If it doesn't, yeah. So I just think it's just better to keep with the wine. We get the theme. And then if it comes out on a Friday or maybe a Thursday or maybe a Monday afternoon, which you guys really, really seem to like, then there's just not, the Wednesday attached to it. I don't know. Anyways, I'm going through it, you guys. If my energy is a little bit low today, I apologize. I really wanted to have a video out for you last week after I came home from London. I was so excited. Like, CrimeCon UK was such an amazing experience. Thank you everybody who came to meet me and hug me and take pictures with me and support me and just, oh my God, it was amazing. I met wonderful other creators and podcasters. So it was really great. And then I came home to just devastating news. One of our very, very, very close family friends, it's like an uncle to me, they lost their 12-year-old daughter very unexpectedly on the 13th, and I have not been in the headspace. I've had this case actually ready since before I left, ready to film when I got home, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. So yeah, if that's what you're feeling right now, it's what we've been going through. But I woke up very positive today. I put on my, pink peppy power suit, ready to go. There's absolutely no pressure at all, but if you would like to support the Cormack family, I will leave a link in the description below. Right now, they are currently in the Philippines, but would like to come home to Canada and bring Eden's ashes here. So if you want to contribute in any way, that would be great. If not, like I said, absolutely no pressure. But anyways, wanted to keep you up to speed with what is going on with me. And with that being said, I think the best thing to do is just get started and just feel, I don't know, your guys' comfort. Again, I know when I say that it's weird because it's a camera, but I feel your comfort. So thank you. All right. Riddle time. Today's riddle, I almost didn't have one. I was so unprepared. So this was like a last minute one. I don't think I've done this one before. I didn't even get it anyway. So, but I sometimes I'll go through them and I'm like, do I know the answer to this? Did I do this one? And I still don't. I never get the riddles. You guys are so smart. So, okay, today's riddle is, what has one head, 1 foot, and 4 legs? All right, get settled in, you guys. Let's get started. Today's one with like a lot of twists and turns. It's one of those cases I have never stopped thinking about since I've heard about it a really long time ago. And it's one that I wanted to cover for a long time. And then a couple weeks ago, somebody in the comment, I think it was like 2 people in the comments, asked me to talk about Belinda Temple. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't stop thinking about Belinda. So this one's for you guys. It's a crazy case. I still don't know how to stick to my feelings about it. I feel like it's one of those ones that go all over the place. But basically, in a nutshell, we were talking about the murder of pregnant mother and second mother to be, Belinda Temple, who was from Katy, Texas. She died on January 11th, 1999. And even though this case has been going on for over 20 years, there has been with an arrest, convictions, appeals, new trials, resentencing, there is still such a divide. And I think that has to do with just like all of the layers to consider and go through. And it's just like, just when you have one opinion, you hear another detail and you're like, well, do I want to stick with this? I'm telling you, hold on. Okay, you guys. I think one thing everybody can agree on, though, is that what happened to Belinda and her unborn child is just so tragic. Absolutely did not deserve it. Belinda's described as just like, I don't know, just like the sweetest. I know that I never want that to get, too drawn out and not hold meaning. But I do find that is such like a common explanation for somebody's character who is just done so wrong. And that sucks because it's like, what? There are a lot of shitty people out there. Why do the Belindas need to to go through this. Belinda was born Belinda Lucas on January 30th, 1968. She was actually a twin, and her twin sister's name is Brenda. Her parents, Carol and Tom, they all had B names for their children. So it was Belinda, Brenda, Brent, Barry, and Brian. Like, my poor children rarely get called by their names, and none of their names like rhyme or are of the same letter. So I cannot imagine what Carol and Tom would have gone through trying to call one of their kids and like had to go through the roster until they got the first name. Just, I would have been a mess. And like I said, Belinda's just described as always having a smile on her face, very positive. She is somebody that people like to be around just because of her like peppy energy, no matter what kind of mood you were in. Belinda was just always somebody that, I don't know, made you feel better. She loved life. She did really well in school. She loved making friends, so she was quite popular, but I got the sense of, I don't know, I guess like if popular could be misconstrued sometimes as like not always the nicest, but Belinda was like just one of those people who just was friends with everybody. And she was also very athletic, which is what caught the attention of a star football player at Stephen F. Austin University. His name was David Temple, and he grew up in a very tight-knit family. I guess their family was very respected in Katy. It sounds like the family was also very close to each other. They lived like all like within the same block. I love that. Right now my family is doing that, but I'd love to just have like a little compound where we're all together. Anyways, sorry. So David was a linebacker for the Katy High School Tigers when he was in high school, and he was considered like the star player, a local celeb, hot shit. They called him the Temple of Doom. Fun fact, Renee Zellweger was also a cheerleader for the Tigers when he played. So it was due to his talents that he got a scholarship to Stephen F. Austin University. Oh, I almost said that, guys. University. And this is where he met Belinda. Because they were both really athletic, they hit it off right away. They also had common interests. They were both getting their master's in education. So it was a really good fit. And a year into their relationship, David went to Belinda's parents and asked if he could propose. And they thought that that was really cool, and they respected that he even wanted their blessing. So they said yes, and he proposed to her on the football field at the 50-yard line, and she accepted. After graduation, they just did the whole like settling down, do the family thing. They got married, and then in 1995, they had a son that they named Evan. Belinda's described as just being a very natural mother. She took to it very instantly, which makes sense because she just had like such a love for children anyway. So when you're already, I feel like really like cute teachers who just like love kids so much, and then they have their own kids. I don't know. It's just a really adorable bond to see. It's like one of my best friends. She wanted to be a teacher her whole life, and now she's like just the best mom. I just love looking at her be a mom. I guess it was very effortless, and it was the same for David as well. He loved being a father. He was a very attentive dad, very proud dad. And David and Belinda made the decision that shortly after Evan was born, they wanted to move to Katy, Texas, where David had grown up. It's described as just a very, tight-knit community, good place to raise your kids. So they bought a beautiful home in one of those idyllic neighborhoods, bought the dog, got the careers. The dog, backtrack a little bit here for a second, is going to play quite a big part in this case later, so just a little inside scoop. But they both got great teaching jobs. David as a high school football coach and also a teacher at Aleph Hastings, and then Brenda got a job as a teaching special education, and she actually got this job at Katy High, where her husband was like this star football player back in the day, which I thought was really cool. Belinda's coworkers described her as, their nickname for her was their sunshine. She was just bubbly and full of light. Again, I'm sure there are very trying times as a teacher, and it seemed like Belinda was the one that everyone just kind of went to for like a little bit of a reset. It sounds like a lot of the students also did that as well, which I think is really cool because it's not always an easy feat to get along with your teachers, especially in like that junior high school phase. I guess on paper, it kind of sounds like the Temples were just living that very picturesque life. And then in the spring of 1998, Belinda found out that she was pregnant. They were expecting a baby girl who they had already named Erin. Family and friends describe this as a really exciting time, especially for Belinda. She had already had the nursery done pretty early. She had painted it this very nice, bright, cheery yellow. And she was just counting down the days for this baby girl to come and complete the family. Instead of completing the family, a month before Erin's due date, the Temple family was completely shattered. It was January 11th, 1999. The day started off very normal. Evan went to daycare and Belinda and David went to their teaching jobs. Around 11, Belinda got a call from Evan's daycare saying that he wasn't feeling well and that he needed to be picked up. Belinda had an after-school meeting that she absolutely needed to go to, so she started trying to get a hold of David to see if he could go and pick up Evan instead. And she's trying to call through the school. Nobody can track David down. So several of Belinda's coworkers that saw her while she was trying to make this call said like this was one of the rare times that they ever saw her frustrated, where she was like, where is he? He should be at work right now. Like, I can't leave. She did end up leaving to go and get Evan, because what other choice do you have as a parent when your child is sick, but still trying to get a hold of David. She did finally get a hold of him when they got back home and was like, I need you to come back here because I have this meeting to go to. So he did leave work. He made it home shortly after 12:30, and Belinda was back, I think, right after 1 p.m. David said that afternoon, Evan seemed to be doing all right. It seemed like he just had a fever. Maybe he was trying to like fight something. So David ran him a cool bath. And he said after the bath, it kind of pepped him up a little bit. And all he was really interested in at that point was kind of like hanging out with dad at home now and playing. Around 3:20, Belinda left school. Her meeting was over. She stopped at her in-laws' house to get soup that her mother-in-law had prepared for Evan. And David said he believed that she arrived back between 3:45 and 4-ish. David said when she got home, she was pretty beat from the day. She's like just in the home stretch of the end of her pregnancy, had to stay late. There was a lot of, running around during the day. So she said she just wanted to rest. And he said that he would go and take Evan to the park and run a couple errands, like getting cat food. He said that when they went to the park, they were only there for a few minutes and Evan was thirsty and wanted to go and grab a drink. So he went to the nearby Brookshire Brothers and got a drink, and that's also where they picked up the cat food. From there, he figured that he was just going to stop by Home Depot because that weekend, him and Belinda had picked up some brackets for some shelving that they were going to put in Erin's nursery, and they had grabbed the wrong size. So he was like, all right, well, we're already out. Let's go to the Home Depot and grab these brackets. From Home Depot, they headed home, and David said that they arrived home around 5:30. David said he unbuckled Evan, helped him out of the truck, and he just expected him to wait and like play in the yard while he ran in, told Belinda that they were there and wanted to see if she wanted to go out for dinner somewhere. As he's walking up to the house, though, he said that it looked like somebody had broken in. He just saw like the door kind of open and some smashed glass. So he just turns around, picks up Evan, and runs to the neighbor's house. He bangs on the door. His neighbor opens the door, kind of shocked because he described David as more like not so like aggressive banging, like, hey, he was always kind of like even tone. And he's in a panic and he's like, take Evan, call 911. Somebody has broke in my house. And he just books it back to his home. So this neighbor has his wife behind him, like, what's going on? He basically says the same thing, like, take Evan, call 911. Someone's broken into the Temple house, and ran after him. He can't even catch up to David. He's like pretty much gone. And by the time he gets to the yard, he can't get in because the Temple's dog, Shaka, is in the yard and barking and protecting the outside. Like I envision like it would have been like what the Sandlot boys dealt with when their baseball went over. So he's kind of trapped. He really doesn't have any choice but to like not help David. And David's run through the house, goes upstairs and finds Belinda in their closet, dead from a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Her injuries are described as so horrific that even when you listen to the 911 call, the operator asks if he can perform CPR to try to save the baby, and he's like, I can't, her head is gone.
Harris County 911 Police Fire Ambulance.
Somebody's broken into my house and my wife has been shot.
Stay on the line for the ambulance, sir. We have a shooting victim. Go ahead, sir.
I just walked in. My wife, I believe she's been shot. It's got blood everywhere.
Okay, sir. Is she breathing?
Her brain is on the floor. I think she's already dead. She's 8 months pregnant.
Okay, sweetie. Just stay on the phone with me, okay? Sir, is there any way that you can kneel down next to her and see if she is breathing? Sir. Sir.
She's dead.
The neighbor's wife has already called, so police do arrive on the scene while David is inside, but like their neighbor, the police cannot get through. Like, this dog is not letting anybody come through, and it's pretty much like it's a clear understanding that if you try to come through this house, this dog will like end your life and stop you. For anybody who is just listening to this episode and is not able to see photos of what the dog looks like, this is a chow mix and just a very fierce protector of the Temples. So he's just barking, smashing into the fence, and the police know that they need to get into this house to try to help Belinda anyway, and they're getting prepared to shoot shotgun to get to Belinda, and David runs down and is able to put the dog in the garage. So the police go through with David, and as they're walking through, they feel the same thing that he did. It looks like a break-in/robbery. There is glass broken to get into the house. The TV is toppled over from the stand. There's drawers open, things on the ground, and then eventually they make their way up to Belinda and find her in the closet with this horrific wound and come to the conclusion that it was caused by a 12-gauge shotgun. Now, it appears that Belinda was probably kneeling at the time that she was shot, which is something that I do go back to sometimes. And that's just because like a lot of like the forensic evidence from like the wound was very low in the closet. So only got like the first row of the clothing, and then like the back of the closet was in that area was basically protected because the clothes were there. So there was a search done of the house to try to see if whoever did this left a weapon behind, or if there was a weapon in the house that could have done this. There were 2 guns in the house. David did like to hunt. These were 2 rifles though, and there was no sign of a shotgun or even shotgun shells. During her autopsy though, they were able to get fragments of a shell. There were pellets from the shell. How many times have we said shell, Sherrilyn? But there was also just like a part of this plastic casing. And from that, they were able to determine that it would have come from a double-aught buck shell. I am not a hunter. We have talked about this in previous videos. I don't know much about guns. I've never gone to a gun shooting range. Sometimes I want to, sometimes I'm scared. But again, this is something about the casing that we are also going to go back to. Lots of like pins in the tabs here, I'm telling you. That's why this one is a doozy. As detectives are just doing like a little bit more of a thorough search of the scene, they start to think that it like just certain things aren't looking right. Almost like it was staged. The TV that had been, tossed on the floor, it was still plugged in, and they figure if this was somebody who was ransacking the place, maybe would have been more aggressive and it would have yanked it out. And they also thought that it looked like on the edge of the TV stand that it was like fresh drag marks, like that you're just trying to like maintain the integrity of the TV and not break it, but you kind of want to make it look like somebody was aggressive. And then when they looked in the drawers that were open, it didn't look like anything was disturbed. There were clothes that were still like very neatly folded and dish towels and stuff. Like I'm talking like Marie Kondo. So if somebody's rifling around, they're not going to take the time back to ask it if it sparks a joy and if it wants to be folded properly or go to the garbage or donation. Same with like the knickknacks. It was all like very neatly ordered. I don't know if the Temples had like one of those crazy junk drawers that you just never want to open to but always go to if you can't find anything in your home. And nothing important or nothing at all really seemed to be missing from the house. In the bedroom where Belinda was found, there was a jewelry box of hers that looked undisturbed. She also had jewelry on her at the time, and none of that was taken. And then there was also a plate of David's that had some of his jewelry just next to the TV of theirs in the bedroom. And this had like one of his like conference champion rings. So like a big sucker. There was like a chain, his wedding ring, and it wasn't missing. It was all still there. And then there was the back door. So the glass to the back door was broken in the area to like get your hand through and open up the door. But investigators figured that if it was closed, then when you punch out the glass, it's going to fall like directly in front of that area. Totally makes sense. But a lot of the glass was kind of in like the living room area, which would have been consistent if the door was open and then punched and then the glass came out this way. I hope you guys are following. Now, there was some glass in that area of like when you directly walk in, but there was also quite a bit in the other area of where it would have, the door would have clearly had to be open. And some of it was like 13 feet away from the door. So with this, the focus starts to go to David pretty quickly because it's always the husband, right? But physically, there wasn't much to support that. He was photographed, he was swabbed, and there was nothing. No gunshot residue on his hands and no blood on him. And I mean, without being graphic, there was substantial amount of blood and splatter in the closet. So the lack of blood was also kind of concerning in terms of his innocence as well, because it kind of showed that he really didn't try to touch and move his wife to see what happened. So he's brought in for a standard interview. He ran through the timeline that we just went through. And then at the end of it, the investigators pretty much outright told him, we can't clear you as a suspect at this time. So David went back to his parents' house where he was staying and told them about the interview and the comment that was made. And from this, his family decided that the best thing to do was to get a lawyer involved at that time right away before there's just like anything that could go sideways or be misconstrued. So at this point, detectives are no longer able to get answers from David, so they start to go through the neighborhood. Basically, they want to know if they saw or heard anything suspicious and at what time, and most of them are saying no, which is odd because this is the time that everybody's returning home from work. So they're like pulling into their driveways, they're outside, grabbing their mail, picking their kids up from the bus stop, walking their dogs, and no one seemed to hear anything. That is until a father of 3 sons informs the investigators that his sons are potential ear witnesses. They all said that they heard it together. It was the afternoon that Belinda was killed, and they heard this loud boom. They all described it as a boom, and they heard it while they were in their living room watching a movie after school. Each brother individually is asked to describe it, and they described it almost like at first they thought, it did somebody set off a firecracker, and then the older brother was like, was that a gun? Now, the huge key piece to this evidence is the brothers were able to tell investigators what movie they were watching and what scene it was at when they heard this boom. It was Dr. Dolittle, and from their information, they were able to narrow down the scene and then calculated what time that would have been that day. The scene that they heard it in was at 24 minutes and 50 seconds into the movie. And so if they got off their bus around 3:45, did about 15 minutes of homework, had a snack, and then started watching the movie, it brought investigators to this time frame being about 4:35, that if this was a gunshot, Belinda would have been killed. That's the time frame. And if this is true, then David Temple couldn't have been the person that fired the gun, because at that moment, he was seen on surveillance entering the Brookshire Brothers with Evan to grab his drink and cat food. After that visit, he and Evan are also caught again at around 5:15 in the Home Depot surveillance. So this started to open up the possibility that maybe somebody else was involved. Pretty quickly, their interest turned to somebody that the Temples did know. It was their neighbor, a 16-year-old boy named Riley Joe Sanders. I guess at the time he was known as being like that dude who was a little bit rebellious, smoked weed a lot with his friends. and got into mischief here and there, and his friends were known to, be troublemakers and get into mischief. And it said that Belinda also got to see that side of him. He actually attended Katy High and was one of her students in a couple classes. I didn't get the sense that he gave her trouble in class, but he often missed class. And so she would have to let his parents know. And because this was such a frequent thing, his parents had recently grounded him from being able to use his car. Now, Riley was actually interviewed by the news reporters before he was ever spoken to by investigators. And it was the night that Belinda had died, and that he said he was concerned and it's very unsettling, and that he was at school the day that it happened. When detectives interview Riley Joe Sanders, he admits to them that he actually wasn't in school the whole day. He was in school for most of the day, but then he did skip the last period, I believe, to go and smoke weed with his friends. They asked him if he was willing to take a polygraph. He did agree to it and failed. We know from very, just a lot of instances that there is a reason why polygraphs are not always reliable and why they're not admissible in court. So, I always go like, why, what's even the point? But I do, I guess, understand from an investigative standpoint that it's kind of just like feeling if the person's even going to allow you to do it, because they're like, if someone's just like, no, I don't want to do it, then it might just be a little bit more ammo to push a little bit harder, like they might be trying to hide something. So I get it. Anyways, it's not always like a reliable source for like the story though either. So because of this, he is interviewed several more times, as are his friends and people who knew them in the area. And investigators did find out that he had quite easy access to shotguns. His dad had a couple in the house and was very open with investigators that Riley Joe Sanders had permission to use them whenever he wanted to go hunting. Allegedly, he had friends who had stolen a shotgun the week prior to Belinda's death, but those friends said that this was something that Riley was not involved in. And ultimately, detectives felt like Riley was just a dead end. And this part's a little bit confusing to me, because they basically said that they felt that there was really no way to link the shotguns that he had access to or was known to be around to Belinda. And they felt like the grounding for not being able to, have your car just wasn't enough motive to actually take somebody's life, your teacher and your next door neighbor. So they went back to looking at David, and they found a bombshell in terms of looking at a motive. David had been having an affair with a coworker of his. Her name was Heather Scott, and she was a new teacher there. She was the grade 9 teacher at Aleph Hastings. And there's quite a bit of complexity surrounding this relationship from the start, aside from the major issue that David is married. A lot of people were interested in Heather. They thought she was the cute new teacher that was at the school. And one specific person who had a lot of interest besides David was a good friend of his and also one of the coaches for the football team. Sidebar, he's also married too. So there's a triple triangle going on here. Everyone's intersecting. And both of these guys were kind of competing for her attention. This is very Raquel, Tom Schwartz, Tom Sandoval I'm getting, you guys. I know I'm not over Sandoval yet. It'll happen soon. I'm just there's a reference for a lot of things. Basically though, they'd go out to weekly work functions where all of the teachers would go out and have some drinks at a pub. So they did that, had drinks, but David was always wanting to stay out a little bit later with Heather. And then the two friends would even talk about where they stood with her. Hey, how was your convo with her? Now I'm getting Love Island vibes. Except none of those guys are married. This whole thing is described as being horribly concealed within the school, especially. Everybody kind of saw David and then his other friend just hanging off of her. And as the weeks were going by, the flirtation was becoming more intense. So intense for David that he even arranged to meet up with his friend and say listen, where do you stand with her? Are you willing to leave your wife for her? And his friend admitted that the two of them had kissed, but he was no, I couldn't see myself leaving my wife for her, and asked David the same question, like, what about you? And David said, I don't know. So David pretty much went like full steam ahead with Heather and was very brazen. For example, Belinda's birthday is on December 30th, and her twin sister had come down to celebrate because this was a big one. The twins were turning 30 on the 30th, like big milestone. Instead of celebrating this milestone and ringing in the new year, that is the next day, and just weeks before the new baby is arriving, David makes plans with Heather for New Year's and tells Belinda he won't be around because he's going on a hunting trip. Brenda, Belinda's twin sister, thank goodness she was there, said that obviously Belinda was heartbroken. I can't even imagine, especially with all of like the pregnancy hormones, and you're like just in this last haul, like those last couple weeks, you're just already feeling like so defeated. And I mean, some people are like super excited, but you know what I mean? Like you're just like, okay, how much longer? Like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And then to just like not have your husband's support as you're starting off the new year like that. Yeah, no. David ended up staying the weekend at Heather's apartment. Heather's roommate was there, so she was privy to a lot of this affection. She saw that David had bought Heather a necklace and some perfume for Christmas. And the two of them seemed to be very open with like the status of where things were with them at this party that Heather hosted for New Year's Eve at her and her roommate's house. So David came home from Heather's on the 2nd of January. And on the 8th, Heather allegedly told him that she wasn't sure if she could keep doing this with him. David's response to that was that he was falling in love with her, and she said that she also felt the same. And it was 3 days after that conversation, Belinda was killed. Investigators obviously confront David and Heather about this affair. They both admit to it, but kind of downplayed it. He says that it was a huge mistake. He loved Belinda so much. There was nobody that could compare to Belinda. And that it was just all about like the physical attraction to him. There was no love or falling in love like Heather had claimed he had said. Regardless of what they were telling investigators, they felt that this was a far better motive than Riley Joe Sanders would have had for being grounded and being called out on that. And they wanted to go through with charges. But 3 months after Belinda was killed, a grand jury decided not to indict not only Riley Joe Sanders, but nobody, not even David Temple in Belinda's murder. So David was free to go on with his life. He went back to teaching, and about 1.5 years after Belinda was murdered, he remarried the woman that detectives believe he killed for. He married Heather Scott, which I just can't even imagine what pain that would have done to Belinda's family. It's like you think you know somebody. As this investigation is going on, you're learning things about your son-in-law that aren't, don't paint him in the best light. You would have never wanted somebody to hurt your loved one. And Belinda would have been devastated if she ever knew that he was cheating on her. And then to, have him go off and marry this woman that he was seeing prior to her death, there's just, that stings. And they definitely felt the same as detectives. Belinda's family thought that David had planned this all along, but there was just nothing they could do. They felt very helpless. For years, they tried to come up with different scenarios to look at and different avenues, and just nothing was happening. And then they saw the case of Lacey Peterson. And this just set off a trigger in them very similar. A pregnant mom just weeks, days away from having a baby right around the same time as Belinda lost her life. And then as the investigation is unfolding, this also blonde, blue-eyed gal comes into the picture who is having an affair, although I truly don't believe that Amber knew that Scott Peterson was married, and Heather did know about David. So anyways, just a lot of similarities. Like, that would really sting. So from there, they just had it in them to fight again, get this urge or this, newfound strength to just keep going. Because that is one thing. Sorry, guys, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think it's important. One thing that when I speak to family members who are still fighting for justice for somebody they've lost, there's a point where that fight doesn't ever go away, but it depletes. You just cannot constantly be knocked down just year after year after year and just always maintain that strength. So I do think that it comes in waves. There are moments where the intensity is very high and you have the strength to go through it. But then you also have those lows where you just feel like nobody cares, nobody's listening. What's the point? Even though in the back of your mind, you are going to get that strength again. So it sounds like that is what Belinda's family was going through, and it was the Lacey Peterson case that kind of pumped them up again and reinvigorated their fight for Belinda. So they reached out to the prosecutors and they pleaded, just like, please take another look. And she agreed. And this prosecutor was Kelly Siegler at the time. And if you've watched a lot of true crime, I guarantee you have heard about her. She is super intense, super theatrical. During one of her trials, she was the prosecutor who brought in the bed a wife had killed her husband on and then mounted her co-counsel to try to reenact like the scene and the murder. So she agreed. She dug into the case, and then she had some of the items that were in evidence retested. One of them was David's jacket that was in the bedroom, and it ended up showing up positive for traces of gunshot residue. And this kind of seemed to be like the big piece that she needed to bring to a grand jury, and this time they indicted David. He was arrested for Belinda's murder on November 29th, 2004. And this was just about 6 years after Belinda was killed. This is where things got confusing to me, though, because the prosecution had quite the battle because the evidence that was used to indict him, the jacket having the gunshot residue, was not admissible in court. The defense had argued that since gunshot residue is airborne, it was most likely on a multitude of things in that bedroom that weren't tested. David's also somebody who liked to hunt, who's somebody who went to the shooting range. So it could be, not unusual for him to have residue on his clothing. So the judge did agree with that, and that's why it was not admissible any longer. So basically, the prosecution was just really left with the status of the marriage and David's affair to pick apart. And this did open up a lot of things that I think people from the outside weren't seeing. There were several witnesses, close friends of Belinda and David's and family, who testified that they were going through a rough time after their son was born. One thing that a lot of people had commented on that really bothered them and bothered me as well was that David would make comments about Belinda's appearance in front of them, often her weight. He'd do things like slapping her butt in front of people and calling it like a big ass or a fat ass. Even Belinda's sister saw that on that last visit where she was celebrating her and Belinda's birthday together. He was making fun of her big butt. And I mean, she's 8 months pregnant, you dick. Another common thing that people said was that David did appear to have a controlling personality. I don't think that it was as obvious of a control in some of the cases that we have gone through together, but kind of in subtle ways where he'd make comments about, to other people of how to reel your wife in and be the man of the house. And friends said that they would see this beautiful bright light in Belinda, and she was outgoing and really funny, and did notice a shift in that personality when David was around her, where she was a little bit more reserved and a little bit more subdued. These friends would also be around when David would make comments about her weight, and then when he would leave the room, the wife would be like, Belinda, that's not you. You have to stick up for yourself. What the hell? You're beautiful. And it just kind of seemed like she just would rather not deal with it. One thing I think everybody did agree on was from what they saw, David was a really great father to Evan, but it reverted back to the negativity when it came to Belinda's family and his comments just about Belinda raising Evan. He often called her family white trash and didn't want them to be around Belinda or Evan very much. And he didn't want the influence that she had of her upbringing to impact how she was raising Evan. Belinda's friends had stated that she never outright came and said, I know that something else is going on with David, but she did make comments that the way that he was commenting on her appearance was making her feel like really unattractive and hard on herself. And then that coupled with him spending quite a bit of time away from home, she was like, I don't know if it's just me or if he's pulling away because he's seeing somebody else, which we know her instinct was right. It was true. He was. And that's what the prosecution felt like was the best motive for this case. Now, Kelly Ziegler says that she believed David killed Belinda around 4 p.m. when he got home, or when she got home rather, from his parents' house, and then staged the scene and took Evan out to get on camera and have an alibi after the fact. She also thought that in between the trips from the grocery store and the Home Depot, he most likely disposed of the shotgun at this point, and that's why there had never been one found. And she kind of had a little bit of a witness to that. There was an eyewitness who knew David from high school who testified that he saw him in an area of town that was kind of like more isolated. It wasn't very close to his house, but there was like a lot of rivers and ponds and just like acres and acres of field. Now, allegedly, law enforcement did do a search of this whole area. There was a foot search. There were canines that were out. There were divers. Also, heat-seeking equipment on a small plane, but they did not end up finding a murder weapon. Another big part of the prosecution case was the Temple's dog Shaka that I was mentioning prior, because like we established, Shaka did not let anybody in the house that day. So if somebody was trying to burglarize it, it seems like it would have been impossible for somebody to come through. I mean, the police were literally considering shooting the dog to go into the house. So if the Temples were basically the only people that Shaka wouldn't react this way to, then they thought that just further strengthened their case because it was David. The dog loved and was familiar with David, had no reason to bark. Now, the defense had a lot to come back with. With Shaka, they said that Shaka spent a lot of time in the garage, and he had like a little hangout zone there. There was like a bed crate for him and food and water. And so they said that afternoon, that's where he was. He wasn't in the backyard. He wasn't in the house to protect. He was in the garage. It was only when David came home that he had opened the garage to get to the back door that Shaka got out. They had more explanations too. The jewelry, for instance, the one that was on the open plate, David's big ring and his chains and his wedding ring. When you actually look at the scene, this plate was on the side of a TV. It was like there was a dresser with a TV on it. And when you walk in the door, there's like, you see the side of the TV, and the plate was actually on this side of the TV. So you would have never seen it unless you walked fully into the room, and the closet was on this side, so closer to like where the door was. And the defense, assuming that somebody would have shot Belinda, they wouldn't have taken the time to look around and find this plate of jewelry. They also said that even though investigators believed that nothing was missing, David did make a claim to Farmers Insurance on January 13th, 1999, and he did report that there was jewelry missing. He reported 3 pairs of earrings, 2 watches, and 2 necklaces. My daughter always makes fun of the way that I say necklace. This kind of sounds like one of those situations where the detectives were like, well, we didn't know about it, so we just rolled with nothing being missing. But I guess They did know that there was a report filed because on January 26, 1999, they said that they saw a news report talking about it. And then the detectives contacted David's attorney and requested a list of the items so that they could send that out to local pawn shops and see if anything turned up, which they said there wasn't anything that was recovered. Now, the glass at the back door was definitely a concern that they had to try to overcome, and something that for me personally, I always thought of. So the way the defense described it is that there was glass that was in the direction that it should have been if the door was closed, but not all of the glass would have fallen out of the pane. So when David had busted through the door, there was a chest right behind the door, and it would have hit it and flung out a bunch of glass that was still in the pane. They also brought in a defense expert who had testified that he had reconstructed the scene building a similar living area, same door, and that the pattern did look similar. And then when it came to things looking staged, especially the TV, the investigators said that one of the main things that made them feel like it was just gently placed down or pulled off of the stand and then put on the ground, still plugged in, was that when they turned it on, because it was still plugged in, that it did turn on. However, David's family had testified that on January 22nd, they did take it to a repairman, and this person testified that it was in rough shape. The main printed circuit board and yoke, again, not tech savvy, my friends. This is just from me researching and taking statements from others. This expert had said that had come loose, and then there were definitely distortions like of the picture. And then in his opinion, this damage would have happened and it would be consistent with a TV falling off or being, pushed and dropped off of a cabinet or a TV stand rather. Now, I think, and obviously the defense thought, who am I, that the three ear witnesses, the three brothers who heard this boom that they described, were really important. And I think that they are pretty much the only reason that I've ever gone back and forth on this case, because of them hearing this boom and working that out into a timeline, and David being seen with Evan on surveillance. And the only thing that the prosecution could really say is that she didn't believe that the children were lying about what they heard. She just thought that they just didn't know what they heard, and that it wasn't unusual that nobody else in the neighborhood did hear anything, especially all of the people that were out getting mail, arriving home, picking up their kids, because she felt like since this was done in the closet, that it was almost able to act like as a silencer because you're in this tight space, and then you have all of the clothes almost like a little blurring effect, silencing effect. It would have muffled the sounds is what I'm trying to get at. So if the defense is to be believed, though, if these three brothers did hear something who, by the way, the trial had gone on like 6 years after this happened. They were teens by this point, and to that point had still strongly maintained like they knew what they heard, or not know what they heard, but they definitely all heard the same like boom. And when they got through like the firecracker scenario, they believed that it was a gunshot. So if the defense is to be believed and they did hear a gunshot, this led them to point to Riley Joe Sanders and his friends being the people or person to kill Belinda, because clearly David was not there. The defense believed that whether it was planned or not, maybe it was just they were just hanging in the area and this was just something that they saw an opportunity at. They saw David leave and they went in to steal some items, not expecting Belinda to be home. She heard them, ran to her closet. She brought her cordless phone with her to call for help, but before she could, she was shot. So to try to combat that whole scenario, Riley was called to testify, but this was a really big move because it was the prosecution that called him as a witness. And he said that there was absolutely no motive. There was no hard feelings between him and Belinda for her, saying that he was skipping school and had no longer had access to his vehicle. He even said that this conversation was something that he was a part of. It was all of them in the same room, so he knew what Belinda was saying. And of course, no teenager wants to have their car taken away from him, but he wasn't like raging angry at Belinda. And he said that also wasn't the first time that she had gone over there with concerns. He said on another occasion, Belinda had also gone over because he and some friends had left some beer bottles and beer cans that had gotten into her yard. So it wasn't unusual for Belinda to communicate with his parents her frustrations with some of his and his friends' actions. Now, he did admit on the stand that just a couple weeks before Belinda's murder, he found out that his friends had messed with some of the Christmas decorations at the Temple's house, but he said that he told them to go and put them back up. Maybe that was just to show like how there truly wasn't like a lot of animosity there, or that he didn't want to get in trouble for anything again. Now, his whereabouts that day are a little all over the place. He stated that he had gone to 5th and 6th period, but during 7th period, he and a friend of his had skipped school to go back to his house, Riley's house, to smoke weed. They then drove around 2:45. He took his friend home. Then he went to another friend's house to hang out for a little bit, and then came home around 3:30. When he got home, he called a different friend of his to come hang out, which he did, and that friend was also hanging out with a friend, so brought that friend. A lot of friends this guy has. And when they got there, Riley didn't have any more marijuana at his house, so they decided to go down the road to another friend's house to see if he had any. Are you following? This house was only like 20 or 30 houses down from Riley's house. So he said that they talked for about 10 to 15 minutes. This friend didn't have any marijuana either. So they went back to Riley's and hung out around like 4:20. They decided since they weren't getting their hands on any weed, they were going to go to the Quickie Mart and get some cigarettes, which they did. And then they came back home around 4:30. At this point, his two friends were like, well, like we're out, nothing left to do. So they left, and Riley said that he fell asleep. And it wasn't until his dad came home around 6 p.m. that he woke up, and then he woke up to see yellow tape around the Temple's home and found out what happened to Belinda. Riley's father was also called to testify, and he admitted on the stand that he owned shotguns and that Riley had access to them, and he did have permission to use them as he wanted to go shooting. Not people, but like shooting ranges or hunting. Now, allegedly, this piece of wadding, which is the black or the plastic casing of the shell that was found in Belinda, was from a 12-gauge shotgun that the defense said was the same kind of shotgun shell that was found in the Sanders shotgun. Prosecution tried to steer away from this the best they could, I suppose, by just being like, listen, Riley wasn't the only person that has access to a shotgun. David had just as much access, also liked hunting as well. So David's family did testify about guns that they had owned. And they insisted, all of them said that it was Darren, David's older brother, and Kevin, his younger brother, who owned 12-gauge shotguns. But David had only ever owned 20-gauge shotguns. And I think it was I'm saying several, but it was they had each owned a version. It was Christmas 1980, they said. Darren and Kevin received their 12-gauge shotgun, and David had received his 20-gauge. In the early 80s, allegedly, David had destroyed his. He got a bunch of mud in the barrel, they said, and it was just not replaceable or repairable. So his brother said he cut off the end of it and then put duct tape around it to make sure no one would get cut. And then his brother said that he ended up ultimately throwing that gun away before he even went to college. All of his family maintained that after that gun was ruined and thrown away, David never owned another 20-gauge shotgun. And both of his brothers testified that their 12-gauge shotguns were with them at the time of Belinda's death, one of them being in Houston and the other being in Coppell, Texas. Coppell? I'm sorry, you guys. I try. Personally, I do think that was a win for the defense. It seems like pretty strong evidence. I don't think that it was as easy for David to access. I feel like if he would have borrowed a 12 gauge shotgun from somebody, a family member or a friend, like they would have come through and said something. But during the trial, anytime there was kind of like that open window for reasonable doubt, it really all fell back on the affair that David was having with Heather Scott. Even though they both tried to downplay it, there was just way too many people who saw it and knew about it. And it clearly, was out in the open, didn't stop. Belinda died. They got married. And even prior to them kind of like reconnecting again after Belinda died, it was like weeks. I think it was a few weeks after Belinda's funeral, David's friend had asked him, how are you holding up? Do you want to find, like, what do you want to do when you find out who did this? And David surprised him because he was just like, what difference does it make if we know who did it? Like, it's not going to bring her back. And in that conversation, he was more interested in finding out like how Heather was holding up. He wanted to know if she was okay, and then asked his friend to pass along a message of saying sorry to her for getting her caught up in everything. At trial, everybody found out that he had also sent Heather flowers on Valentine's Day, which is a month after his wife has been brutally murdered, his unborn daughter killed. He's sending flowers to the woman he was having an affair with. So at the conclusion of the first trial, that was all just so powerful when it came to this affair that a jury convicted David Temple of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. As he served his prison sentence, it was Heather who raised Evan. I am telling you, you guys, I would be haunting people in their dreams, okay? But she's raising Evan, and Evan to this day strongly feels like his father is innocent. And 5 years after his conviction, it did look like there might have been some evidence to prove that. A couple things had fallen on the defense's lap. One of them was that a friend or acquaintance of Riley Joe Sanders, a guy named Daniel, came forward and said that he basically heard Riley Joe Sanders confess to killing Belinda. He never outright said details or her name, though. He said he walked into a conversation that Riley was having with friends where he said that he had committed a burglary where it went sideways and he had to kill a dog and leave it in a closet. So they started to use this as ammo and started picking apart the first trial. And they found about like 1,400 pages of reports and examinations from investigators that hadn't been handed over to the defense at the first trial. So with this, they obviously argue like this was information, some of it even had to do with Riley Joe Sanders, that we should have been privy to, and that his conviction needs to be overturned. In 2016, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals agreed, and they granted David a new trial. There was a period in 2016 while he was waiting for his new trial that he was released. He was able to go home to Evan and Heather. And then in July 2019, so 20 years after Belinda's murder, his second trial starts. Very similar to the first trial, the defense definitely wanted to take the focus off of David Temple and put it on Riley Joe Sanders. He came to the second trial, again was questioned, and then he was questioned about this confession, but there really wasn't much to say. He just said that never happened and this person heard something not accurate. There was something that caught my eye with the prosecution trying to also downplay Riley's motive, saying that the revenge for the car and the grounding just was not strong enough to like risk that and like take somebody's life. And they described the Temple's home as being in a very nice neighborhood, which it was, but said that there was no history of crimes or break-ins. However, there was evidence that showed that a house near the Temple home had been broken into glass smashed, and this was 9 days before Belinda's death. They did know who did this. It happened to be a couple of Riley's friends. However, they said that he had nothing to do with that incident. But I just thought it was interesting that they, the prosecution was like, there's never crime or break-ins, but there had been. The timeline was also very dissected, and this time around, it was a little bit altered. Even though David had told investigators that Belinda arrived home from work around 3:45, at this trial, his father had testified and said that Belinda had stopped by to grab that soup for Evan prior, but he said that she was still at their house at 3:55. So based on that, the defense argued that David just wouldn't have had time to kill his wife before the time that they had said in the first trial, because this would have got her home between 4:19. And just going off of the timeline of him going to the park, going to the grocery store, and then being seen on surveillance at 3:32, there wasn't enough time to do everything. So then the prosecution's theory altered a little bit, and then they said that he did do it right before he left, but when he came home, before bringing Evan to the neighbors, he went in and ransacked the house and then went and got the neighbors and asked them to call 911. At the end of the trial, a jury convicted David Temple again for the murder of Belinda, and it was 2 hours after the guilty verdict that they all came back to do the sentencing phase. There was a lot of options that were provided, everything from probation, time served, life in prison, and the jury spent 20 hours trying to come up with a sentence and then ultimately came back to the judge and just said that they were deadlocked. So the judge had to declare a mistrial, not for the whole trial, but just for the penalty phase. And it wasn't until April of this year, you are watching this video in 2023 if you come across this later on in life. So until all of this time from 2019 when that trial went on to the mistrial of the penalty phase, that it wasn't until April of this year that he was ultimately convicted of life in prison, or sentenced to life in prison. This is obviously something that Belinda's family has been waiting a long time for. They were able to speak to David and the whole court and just say, how much pain this has been with all of the waiting and the uncertainty and going back to trial, and had quite a few choice words being like, here you are sitting in court being convicted of our sister's murder, and you call us white trash, It seems like Evan is still very steadfast in proving his father's innocence. He has been able to maintain a relationship, as close as they can really have a relationship at a distance, but weekly phone calls and visits. And he does not believe that his father is guilty of killing his mother. Heather and David are no longer married. They ended up getting a divorce in the middle of that second trial. But from what I can see, Evan and David's defense attorneys are appealing this decision. From what I could find, there's not many reports on Riley Joe Sanders. I was able to see that he is married and allegedly has kids and seems to be living a very quiet life. And I do not know what to think. I have questions. I think one of them is if there was no gun tied to David, but there was a connection to Riley's and evidence of the shell of that family shotgun matching the same consistency as, or the same evidence pattern, whatever you want to call it. Again, no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to shells and stuff. But that plastic, being consistent with the one in the Sanders house shotgun, it seems like it was a communal gun apparently. Why was that dismissed so easily, I guess? In the same breath though, if it was Riley and his friends who were in the middle of this burglary, it's hard to believe that no one has come forward or tried to make a deal or slipped. And I do agree with the prosecutions that taking somebody's life, like murdering the pregnant woman who you do have a form of a relationship with, whether it's not always been positive or not, like being grounded from your vehicle, it just sounds ludicrous. And it also sounds like it's not something he really took seriously because there was a point that day that he was driving around. So maybe he got the car back recently. So then what does he care? If anything, to me, the burglary gone wrong sounds more plausible if there was another option instead of just like the revenge for the grounding. I just feel like that's just no. And what draws me to that is the belief of like the forensic evidence where she was kneeling and had a phone. There's just like something about that where it's feeling like she's instructed to do that and look away. Like maybe she's feeling, or like that person's feeling that she is going to recognize them. And then they just felt like there was just no other choice because she saw them. Belinda's shoes always got me though, because she was still wearing them when she was found. And I always thought, okay, if we were going by the original timeline of her going up around like 3:55, 4 p.m. to rest, and then the noise that the neighbors heard was around 4:30, why would she just like still be in them roaming around the house for a half an hour? But with David's dad saying that she didn't leave until around 4, got home around 4:15, talked to David for a little bit, him getting Evan all sorted and leaving, and then her going up to rest, it was maybe like her in the process of changing out of that work outfit and her shoes, taking them off, that maybe she heard like a disturbance, went to go check it out, and then I don't know, they heard her. I don't know. Literally, I'm just all over the place, which I hate because everybody here deserves closure and justice. Most importantly, like Belinda and baby Aaron. And I just cannot imagine how her family feels, especially without like, I feel like when you have a weapon, that is just like really solid, rock solid evidence. And the fact that it cannot be found. I think what they're really looking for, what it sounds like, is they're hoping that with a crime like that, there would be some form of DNA on it, whether that be from, David or from blood from Belinda coming back on it. And they're just so laser focused on that. Then you have like conflicting timelines come up, and then it adds so much more reasonable doubt. So it's like they're kind of constantly trying to disprove all of these things and scenarios and timelines just over and over again, which nobody can heal from. You're just constantly in this fight defensive mode. And then you have Evan, who wholeheartedly believes his father, but obviously loves the woman who gave him life. I go everywhere. Even if with Riley Joe standards, like if David is 100%, like he's truly guilty, can you imagine being under a microscope as the other guy that it probably was, and just like the scapegoat, like would do a number on you? But then what if it was him and then the other? You guys, I can't. I don't know. I really do wish that there could be just some sort of DNA on something that just come through. I don't know. Because I don't even know if that would be possible after all of these years. If the gun would be in a field, you'd figure it's got to go through all of the environmental factors, the rain. If it's in a pond, I mean, well, it's been in a pond for 20 years. All right, I am spiraling again. That is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's riddle is, what has one head, 1 foot, and 4 legs? And the answer is a bed. Now that I said it out loud, I don't think that I did it before. I think that's a new one for you guys. Anyways, if it's not, maybe you got it good, right the second time, unlike me. Okay. All right. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.